Hello students, and welcome to the CompTIA A+ 1202 exam course brought to you by Third Level Technology. I am your instructor, Jim Herbie. In this episode, we're going to continue in Module 1 within the 1202 objectives discussing operating systems. In this episode, we will discuss Section 1.2, Operating System Installations and Upgrades. Let's begin. Our first operating system boot method is a USB boot. A USB boot is where all of our core files that we need to launch and execute our operating system will be stored on a USB flash drive. In order to do a USB boot, we need to configure that within our UEFI BIOS settings. In your UEFI BIOS, you will have a setting for the boot order, the sequence that your computer will go through to look for and then launch all of the operating system core files. We have to make sure that the USB boot is set as our primary boot option. Allow our computer to recognize the operating system is coming from the externally connected flash drive. USB boots are fairly fast and they are convenient, but they are also something that can be easily lost or stolen because your USB drives are mobile and transportable. Our second boot method is an optical media boot. This is where we're going to use either a CD or a DVD to install and run our operating system files. Again, if we want to boot our operating system from an optical disk, we will have to set this as our boot order in our UEFI BIOS settings. Optical media is a very uncommon way to use your operating system because of its slow speeds and limited storage on the disk itself. A network boot, sometimes also called a PXE boot, is where we have a location on our network where all of the operating system files are stored. And all of our authorized users can access and install those operating system files over a network connection. On the user's device, go into your UEFI BIOS settings, configure the network boot as your primary option, and you will also need a PXE-enabled network card on your device. If you don't have either one of those, the network boot will fail. We typically use network boots whenever we have to do a very large deployment of an operating system, and we can also use network boot in our own IT environments. It's a very popular option for IT teams that want to use the network boot option for their files and their upgrades. Our next boot method is an SSD boot, a solid state drive boot. This is where we're going to use the internal SSD storage as the location for our operating system files. This is one of your most common ways to boot and load your operating system. Within your UEFI BIOS settings, you want to have the SSD chosen as your primary boot location. With SSD boots, we also can use a feature called cloning. Cloning is where we can take all of the existing installation files for our operating system and migrate them to the SSD for permanent storage. This is a very good practice so that we have a backup of all of our OS files if there's ever some type of large-scale network disruption or disaster. Another boot method is an internet-based boot. This is where we allow the installation and loading of the operating system via an internet connection. This is what we would also call a cloud service boot, because all of your OS files are going to be stored and accessible in the cloud. In order to do an effective internet boot, you need to have a reliable internet connection. It has to be a connection that will not be susceptible to disruptions or weather-impacted interference. Internet boots are very popular when we need to use remote installations. Another boot method is an external drive boot. This is where our operating system files will be stored on an externally connected storage device. This could be either a hard disk drive or a solid state drive. Again, you have to go into your UEFI BIOS settings and choose the external drive as your primary boot option. This can be a slower process because there is more connections that need to go, internal components, and the external storage, so you may have slightly higher latency. And our last boot method is an internal hard drive boot. This is your standard method for booting your operating system. You will have on your operating system a separate partition on one of your disk platter drives that will store all of your operating system install and boot files. Within your UEFI BIOS setting, your internal hard drive or your internal SSD will be chosen as the default for your bootloader. So we went through all of the different types of ways that we can boot or load our operating system. And now here in the second part, we're going to talk about some of the different installation types. Our first installation type is an upgrade. An upgrade is when we are taking the current operating system on our computer device and we are changing it to a newer version. Operating system upgrades are effective because we can retain all of our stored user data, files, and applications, so that after the upgrade is completed, the user can go back onto their computer and all of the programs and apps and files that they had before will still be there and accessible. Another way we can install an operating system is through a recovery partition. A recovery partition is to be used when we have some type of restoring that we have to do for our system or its files. A recovery partition will be a dedicated partition on the hard drive that will contain all of our operating system recovery files and utility wizards. A recovery partition will be the files that will allow us to restore our computer to factory settings if we have some type of large malware infection or anything else that makes retrieval of our data impossible. The recovery partition is accessible during the boot process, and you can configure within your UEFI BIOS which shortcut key you want to have to access. Our next is a clean install. A clean install is when we are going to place an operating system on a freshly formatted storage drive with no existing data on it. Think of it as like a fresh canvas when you're getting ready to paint. And a clean install is often performed when we have some type of malware infection. This will be where we have some type of corrupted hard drive or storage, and a clean install is the best way to format a new storage drive, and then we can migrate all of our data back onto that clean install through the backup that we hopefully have for all of our data. Next, we have an image deployment. An image deployment is when we are trying to install an operating system on multiple devices at the same time. We use what's called an operating system image, an OS image. This is going to be a large collection of files that will store all of the configurations to load, run, and boot the operating system. And what we can do is we can install all of these different files that are contained within one bundle called the image file. And we can install this image file on multiple computers on the network at the same time. This is commonly done through automated scripting, and it's very popular when you need to install new applications or drivers, because image deployment also allows you to do updating and patching features as well. Next, we have a repair installation. A repair installation is where we are reinstalling the operating system because we have some type of corrupted system files. What we do is our computer will isolate and preserve all of our user data and application settings. And then it will go through the process of fixing the corrupted system files. If we have to do a repair, we can transfer over from our data backups copies of the system files that became corrupted. It allows us to have a fresh start for our user with their operating system when it loads. And we also have a remote network installation. This is where we have a user that is off premises. That means they are somewhere outside of our office central location. And they can install the operating system remotely over a secure encrypted network connection. Deploy an operating system to multiple remote devices. We can use this a lot with our smartphones. If our employees have smartphones or mobile devices that they use out in the field, We can use a remote network install to deploy application updates. We can deploy new application versions, as well as updating all of the operating system additions when needed. Next, we're going to discuss third-party drivers. Third-party drivers are going to be the files that are needed to allow your computer device to interact with the operating system that is loaded. Your third-party drivers typically come directly from your manufacturer or your vendor. These will be specifically designed to interact with the specific device model. You should always obtain your drivers from trusted sources. These should be your manufacturer or your vendor, or some other verified source that you can get through an app store, marketplace, for downloading apps and software to your device. Next, we're going to discuss two different partitioning schemes that we can use with our operating systems. And these will help when we are loading or installing our operating systems, how we can locate the files. The first is MBR, Master Boot Record. This is an older scheme. Master Boot Record allows us to partition our disk up to 4 different primary partitions. And then we can choose which one of those primary partitions will store all of the boot files within. Now, there are a couple limitations to MBR. The first is you only have the ability to partition 4 different sectors. You also are limited to only 2 terabytes in terms of drive capacity. MBR has been replaced by GUID Partition Table, GPT. This is a partitioning scheme that allows us to use up to 128 partitions. UE5 systems have GPT that will be integrated within their boot drives, so it is something that we can very easily link to as a default for accessing all of the operating system files when we load. You also want to be aware of some best practices related to file and user backups. Many times when we are talking about these installation processes, working on the assumption we have a working data backup. This is so important because some of your operating system installation and upgrade methods erase, or it will take offline access to your data. So backups are so important, and we can store them both on external storage drives as well as in the cloud. We also want to have backups for all of our user settings. These will be things like our usernames and passwords, our user access rights, and we can also do backups of these user settings from our servers, our Active Directory. You also want to be aware of backward compatibility. Backward compatibility is when our newer operating system versions can run older applications and hardware. Problem with backward compatibility, though, is that you are limited to the older restrictions. So, for example, you may be able to run a 32-bit application on a 64-bit operating system, but the 32-bit app's performance will still be in the range of the original 32-bit RAM and data speed. And lastly, we're going to discuss the product life cycle. The product life cycle refers to when does an operating system reach its end of life. The product lifestyle begins with the introduction of the operating system, the deployment of it to users, and then its growth and use within the IT world. But eventually we reach a time where that operating system will be replaced by a newer version. And that is what we call end of life, EOL. The date and time that the vendor will stop providing support and updates for that operating system version. This is a very effective way to calendar when we're going to need to upgrade our operating system. It helps us to plan for our upgrades and our replacements, and there is a bridge time. Typically there's about 6 months where you will have the ability to still provide support even after the EOL has been announced by the vendor.
That will conclude our discussion of Section 1.2, Operating System Installations and Upgrades. In our next episode, we will move on to Section 1.3 in the objectives and discuss Microsoft Windows. We thank you for following along in all the episodes in the course and wish you best of luck in your studies. Enjoy the rest of your day.